everyone. I'm Arya.
Harini.
So, in this episode, I will be talking to my co-host Harini, and I'd be going over some of the questions which I've had as a product manager for the past 2 or 3 years. So, okay, so let's start with a very basic question, Harini. How has your experience been into product management, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, so my, I guess, path was a little bit unconventional, um, which seems more conventional now that I look back into it. So my background is in cognitive science and data science. So the cognitive science background really gave me the skills, and trained my thinking into being more customer centric. So always thinking about the user first, understanding why people choose what they choose, why they behave a certain way when they see something, versus something else. A lot of A/B tests, and just really understanding the person and the different user personas that we might be presented with. So that cognitive science background paired with the data science background that I had, analyzing data, making data accessible, and making a big data set make sense because there's so much data. How do we read that data? How do we analyze that data? How do we condense that data? How do we communicate what is found from that data? So that paired with the user first mindset brought me into product. I was looking for something that I could use both of those skills and really make um, big impact into for the customers using that data, making those data-driven decisions. So that's where I found product, and I think it's a great intersection of those two backgrounds, in addition to collaborating with technical stakeholders, different teams, engineering, marketing, sales, to really achieve what is best for the user with that data in hand.
That's an incredible background, Harini. Um, I'm very curious to know how you felt about interacting with engineering teams, and did you face any challenges while filling that gap? And um, how did you um, learn new skills to complete your product skill set, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I'd like to first address one common myth about just product managers or product people in general, that they have to be technical. Although it definitely does help to have that technical background, it's definitely not impossible to um, interact with those technical teams not having a technical background. So that was one challenge that I had to overcome in the beginning, kind of like imposter syndrome, or trying to figure out what that code means. But it's more about just communicating, um, rather than trying to equip yourself with all of those technical skills. So communicating the overall vision. Product managers are in the workplaces that I've been, both big tech and startups. Product managers are really responsible for the strategic vision as well as the tactical execution. And everything in between is the collaboration period between engineers, designers. So how you communicate that strategic vision as clear as it can be, that really helps engineering teams, even though it might not be technical. If you have a clear vision of, okay, this is the problem statement, and this is what we're trying to achieve with that, they can fill in the gaps of that technical solution. So I think communication, and really having that clear vision and being transparent with your stakeholders, that really helps them also arrive to the best technical solution.
That makes a lot of sense. So essentially, product managers are problem solvers.
I would say they're more problem identifiers
Yeah.
because sometimes you have a problem statement that's given to you that, you conduct your user research, you get that feedback from your customers. Often there's a that problem statement that might hear is loaded with many mini problem statements. And sometimes it's not even what you might be thinking or what they might be pointing out to. Sometimes that you kind of have to read between the lines of, okay, what is exactly their problem? It's not this route, but it's actually this route that helps. There's a dependency on that route. Um, so problem identifiers, I would say, and then the solution, of course, you collaborate with your technical team to arrive at that solution, but a lot of times we really need to rewrite the problem statement and remind team members that, okay, this is the problem and focus on the problem more than the solution in the beginning.
In the beginning. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've faced those situations at work as well, where wherein people are so fixated on what solution needs to be shipped and how soon it needs to be shipped, that
Mhm.
many a times we lose focus on the problem statement itself, and now and then things get blurry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that definitely resonates with me and my experience as well. Um, my next question to you is, and I know we talked about this over like many occasions earlier, is that so you have had a product management experience in Amazon. At the same time, you have had uh, PMing experience at being at startups. So how does that differ? And how do you think it um, how do you think it compares to each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like I'm grateful for that opportunity to kind of see both extremes because first at the big tech at Amazon, you have a lot of processes set in place, a lot of tried and tested, they work. Um, a lot of leaders that really stand by um, those tried and tested processes. However, when someone is trying to maybe reinvent the wheel or offer new insights on how something can be done, that might take longer to implement. Everyone might be all for the idea, but actually the implementation might take a couple years. Um, Whereas in a startup, you have the chance to really shape that narrative, the narrative of processes, the narrative of workflows, and kind of take that ownership and leadership. Um, Given that, because you have the opportunity to take ownership, sometimes at a startup, just because there's not enough resources, there's a limited amount of people maybe on your team, you wear a lot of different hats. So I found myself being not only the product manager, but also the project manager, also the product designer, also the finance person who had to, look at overall budget. So a lot of different hats, which is great, I feel, to get those skills and to understand how those functions work, even though that might not be uh, what you've been hired for. Um, but I think it's a great way to really understand what all goes into making a product and making a company overall successful, learning those different roles, interacting with those different stakeholders. Whereas in a bigger company, you're more siloed into, okay, just the product function. You have people who are designing for you. You have people who are thinking about another dependency for you. So you are kind of in your little bubble talking to all those people, but that's your only responsibility. So both, I feel, really equip you with the skills needed for product. One might be a little more involved in other areas, whereas another one might be more focused in product, but I feel both really give you the skills that um, make you successful at product.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. And do you think when you wear those different hats, right? So that also makes you more sensitive or more have more empathy for your cross-functional partners, right? Because when you do their job, you realize, well, this is not easy. Yeah. And then when you are at a startup, since you have to wear a lot of hats, you use ChatGPT a lot. You end up using ChatGPT for functions which you are not hired for, and then you start to realize that, well, AI is a great starting point, but to do this job well, I really need to know how to like what goes into being good at this job.
Mm.
So that's another realization that I've had, and I would love to know your thoughts about it as well. What is the role of AI in your day-to-day workflow as a product manager?
Yeah, and I think this is a really big conversation in the product space right now, just because of the landscape of AI and how rapidly it's moving. Um, I was at a conference this past week where this was a really big topic that they explored as well. And the main theme that ran through all those different conversations was that AI is not here to replace, but it should be used as a tool to help in our work. So I use ChatGPT for, writing user stories if you're more on the tactical side. Sometimes in smaller and bigger, some big organizations, the PM is responsible for not only the strategy, but also the tactical day-to-day, translating business requirements into user stories to communicate to your development team. So using ChatGPT for that, also using AI to look at product analytics, seeing if your product is live, then seeing how your customers are interacting with it, asking AI to produce those data reports that we can see and download and, iterate from there. Um, so really looking to AI as something that will help in our job function, not necessarily replace, because I feel like there's a long way to go for AI to really fully get all of those human capabilities, if they can at all,
Yeah,
um, to really get that pulse on what the user really wants or what they're really asking.
yeah,
Um, so using AI to really help automate workflows, maybe also in design, there's so many design tools, AI design tools that can help create wireframes and prototypes. Um, so really looking to AI as something that would help. And it's something else that you mentioned, uh, that feeling of, oh, we should really know how to do this. That, of course, we should have a lot of skills. Um, and we can do it on our own manual, but in this day and age of how fast things are being developed and the timelines that we have to meet, I don't know about you, but for me, at all the places I've worked, we've had really, really tight timelines just because of the demand.
yeah,
So although we might know the skills or we might want to get those skills, there's just maybe not enough bandwidth for us to do so. So really leveraging AI, and being mindful about it as well, where and when to use it. I feel
yeah,
as it depends on, each organization and how, and the person, how they would like to use it, but being mindful. um, to and using it as a resource to help, not replace something that we do.
Yeah. 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 I think the whole conversation about AI replacing is definitely overhyped. This is
Yeah.
this is something I think everyone agrees to, whether it's an engineer or a designer. And I personally know engineers who use it on a daily basis to accelerate their work.
Mm.
But apart from that, the productivity gains are huge. But apart from that, I think, as you mentioned, it's a very good assistive tool.
Mm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right. So then you mentioned that you use it for translating business requirements to user stories, some data analytics work. Um, do you see a time when these agents or like LLMs become autonomous enough to have reasoning capabilities which you are supposed to have as a product manager? Do you think we are moving in that direction, or is that something you learned during uh, during the um, conference that you attended?
Yeah, this was another topic that was briefly explored. It did come up. Um, whether it will replace our reasoning capability again, I I try to stay away from the word replace. Um, although I'm not underestimating the capabilities of AI. I'm sure it can do a lot
One, I'm Arya.
great. But I think in terms of making that final decision or
Yeah,
uh it might be some time. The reason why I say that is because AI can distill that data down for us to see, okay, what is a trend? Um, what are the outliers historically? How is this? How has this performed? If it's an existing product, if it's a new product, doing that competitor analysis. Um, but I feel like that human intervention or that manual intervention of saying, okay, is this really what our customers want? Not only want, but need right now. And does this fit into our mission or goal? Because once you feed a goal into AI, let's say your primary goal is doubling revenue, just an example. They're gonna find a strategy and make a decision to double that revenue. But in doubling that revenue, what are we losing? Are we losing customer engagement because we're building something that will double revenue, but no one is going to use it? So having that human intervention to come at that final decision point and do that reasoning is, I feel, really important. Even if
yeah,
LLMs do get to that stage of making that decision, using that again as an aid to help see the different scenarios, but having kind of that human touch and product managers and leaders and key stakeholders to really make that final decision.
yes, yeah. But it's definitely an exciting time
Yeah.
in the tech world, and I do feel that this can lead to a lot of disruption. We already see it happening.
Mm.
But yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Um, the next thing I want to touch upon is so this is something that happened with me at work, right? So I'm writing the roadmap of a product, and then I'm dealing primarily with two stakeholders. There's the business stakeholders, and then there are stakeholders who are external, but they affect the product in a great way. So and both of them have different KPIs in mind. Business obviously wants the revenue as a primary driver, whereas when you look at the other stakeholders, they are more focused about customer experience, user experience, and they have a great influence on the product team, right? So then, how do you, in this scenario, manage their expectations and make sure that the roadmap reflects both of their priorities?
Yeah, this is unfortunately a more common issue than we'd like it to be.
Yeah.
Managing expectations and competing priorities. Um, there's a saying that spend 80% of your time developing and 20% of the time aligning. Often companies don't spend any time aligning. This is not only aligning with stakeholders, external stakeholders, but also aligning with those teams. That 20% gives way and makes it so much easier to do that 80% development. So I feel like the biggest thing here, I would say the two biggest things, if we really, boil it down to two things that a product person does, one is prioritization and the second is communication. So now if your prioritization, if there's a challenge in your prioritization, there's something up with the communication. So I would
Yeah.
say communicating to the internal, I'm assuming it's an internal team that is expecting that revenue increase, and maybe an external team expecting or wanting the customer first mindset. Communicating that you have X product, this is the roadmap. For the product to meet this revenue goal, we're going to need XYZ steps with a certain timeline that you can give within a year or however long your roadmap is scheduled for. So that's, I guess, decision tree one. Decision tree two is if we go with the external stakeholders' requirements,
One, I'm Arya.
requirements, it's going to be XYZ steps with this timeline. So I feel like we hear like, oh, product managers really need to build their roadmap. The roadmap, how I've viewed it, and this has really changed my perspective on what product people do in their day-to-day. The roadmap, the prioritization, how we prioritize, all of that documentation that we create or how we present to our stakeholders is not only helping us get a clear vision on what we really need to build or what our strategy is, but more to help us communicate to the external stakeholders or to the people, to our audience. So building that roadmap with those two, those two options, showing them that if we do this, then we're going to get this result. If we do this other option, we're going to get this result. And putting it out on the table, because sometimes teams, or I guess leadership, higher leadership, they don't have time to go into the day-to-day. If we come to some roadblock or if development is delayed for some reason, they don't have time to really go into why. Is it a technical limitation? What is it? So communicating that, okay, this is why we might not be able to achieve this, or this approach may be something worth looking into more than that other approach because of, and then giving your reasoning. So I feel like that 20% alignment between internal and external stakeholders, showing that these are our competing priorities and involving them in the conversation, not saying that this is how we're doing it, but saying this is what it is. Now, if you disagree, let's talk about this together. Like, help me understand your perspective. Oftentimes, when we just say that it's going to be like this, leadership will retort back or, get defensive and say, no, like, this is, it becomes a little political. But involving them in the conversation and saying, this is what I have with the resources and time that you've given me. If you disagree, then let's work on a solution together, because no one will be happy with either option. Only one team might be happy. If you go with the revenue option, the internal team will be happy, the external team might not be happy, and vice versa. So really involving them in the conversation and making that communication transparent, I think it's the first step. And that often paves the way. Once that dialogue is open, that really paves the way into the next steps and kind of making that decision.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Sorry, I think that was a long answer. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, no, I loved it when you said 80% development and 20% alignment. I think that's something that I will take back with me from this conversation. Um, yeah, so yeah, I mean that is actually what we discussed the other day as well, and that's really been helpful. I'd like to say that.
Awesome.
Um, awesome. So yeah, I think we touched upon prioritization briefly, but so what's your way of prioritization when it comes to, say, features that we want to ship on a roadmap? Um, how do you um, how do you prioritize? Do you have a framework that you follow? I know there are many frameworks that are given out in the market, like this RICE framework, there is Moscow, there are tons of frameworks that are being followed in the industry. How do you prioritize?
Yeah. So this really goes back into what is our goal for this product? Instead of getting into the features at the onset, really going back to the drawing board and say, okay, what are our main objectives? Why are we building this product? What do we want? What is the goal of this product? Do we want to increase, attract a new market segment with this product? Do we want to increase customer engagement with this product? So once you have maybe one or two big objectives of why and what this product is doing, then distilling that into specific features that, okay, to introduce this into a new market segment, we need these functions and we need these UI designs. So kind of thinking about it like a tree, like we have like the main point, and then this is like each feature is a branch of how
Mhm.
it's going to get back or how it's going to help that objective. Um, so really identifying exactly what your objective is and then breaking that down into features. Once you have the features, then prioritizing those features and being open to anything can change at any moment, being open to pivots. For example, I can give one anecdote where we were building, um, let's say, we were building, I'll give a silly analogy. Building an orange. We were creating and designing an orange. But we had to pivot to build for a banana. So although the core foundation is the same, they're both fruits. So we have the foundation the same, but the size is different, the color is different, the taste is different. So in that pivot, in that short timeline, how do we prioritize those features to achieve that transition from an orange to a banana? So
Mm.
we use the weightage method of weighing um, by impact, and also use the RICE methodology to determine you know, what should have more priority over something that might be of less priority. So in that orange and banana example, maybe the color can be prioritized for a later iteration, but we need to get the taste changed and we need to get the size changed, or depending on, and that's where those conversations with stakeholders really help, because we get insight, and also the customer, because we get insight into what is really important for them. What we think might be important is sometimes not what's important to them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So having those conversations, and if we need to pivot, knowing and being adaptable to that changing priorities, I feel like that's also very common in not only big organizations, but also small organizations.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's very much on point. I think prioritization is something that's like at the heart of every product person. And I think for me initially, when I started being a PM, um, it was tricky because like my mind would go to factors and give it more weightage, when it was not the case on paper, you know, like my personal bias would get into the way many a times, my personal beliefs, and then eventually I realized that it's very, very important um, to have an open conversation with the UX team, engineering team, and involve everyone in the process to get to the best prioritization framework. That's wonderful. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Great. So looks like we're right on time. Do you have any final thoughts before we end the call and
Um,
the podcast?
um, I'm curious about you, if you could share a little bit more, um, I guess, on your background being in software and engineering. What attracted you to the product space?
Right. So for me, I have always been a computer nerd, as you would say. I started coding when I was 11th grader, and then when I got to my undergrad, I took computer science. So I've always had an inclination towards building things that are useful for people around me. Um, but then when I started working at Siemens as a software engineer, I found it to be very painful to build something and not know why it is being built. So that was very painful for me to work on something without knowing whose life it is impacting. Um, and that sort of made me curious about other roles other than engineering. So I delved into UX design for a bit. I did some freelance gigs as a UX designer, and then I realized this is great. I love that my creative side is being utilized here, but what I'm looking for is more towards the intersection of these like cross functional fields, and that's when I got to know about product management, and that's when I started being a PM at Siemens for a while, and then um, came to the US for a master's in product management. But the program is called software management. But so yeah, I mean that was my and that was my transition to PMing. It was um, that intense desire to understand why something is being built. That's how, or that's why I got into PMing.
Amazing. Amazing. So note to PMs to always give the why to your development.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Awesome.
and that not just for the product, but it's a very good uh, way to align yourself with your develop or align the development team with the vision of where you are heading towards. So
Absolutely.
always going back to the why um, makes the journey fun, in my opinion.